I shouldn't have answered the call. I've told myself that 100 times. But when you're in law enforcement, especially in a quiet town like mine, you take every call seriously. That night, though, I wish I hadn't. It was 11:47 p.m. Dispatch came through with a code 16. A disturbance reported near the abandoned Drexel mill. Drexel wasn't just old. It was legendary in the worst way. You know the stories. A worker fell into the gears decades ago, and they couldn't get all the blood out of the walls. Kids dared each other to sneak in, saying they'd seen lights flicker inside at night, heard whispers. Everyone avoided it. But me, I didn't have the luxury. Badge duty, all that. The caller didn't leave much. Just a shaky voice saying, "There's something, in there." I grabbed my flashlight, radio, and Glock, and drove out to Drexel. It stood like a hulking skeleton in the dark, its shattered windows staring out like empty eyes. My cruiser's headlights barely cut through the thick mist curling around the building. I radioed in, Unit 4 responding. Arrived on scene. No answer. The static on the radio felt wrong. The whole place felt wrong. But I stepped out, crunching gravel underfoot. A single crow squawked from the roof and took off, startled by something unseen. I tried to shake the chill that crawled up my spine. It wasn't cold, but the kind of clammy dread that makes you wonder if you're being watched. I approached the mill. The front doors were chained shut, rusted so badly they looked like they'd snap if you breathed on them. I walked around the side, past weeds tall enough to swallow me whole, until I found a side entrance pried open. That's when I noticed it. The smell. It wasn't just decay. It was sweet and cloying, like rotting meat left in the sun for days. My stomach churned as I ducked through the door. The first thing I noticed inside was the silence. No dripping pipes, no creaking metal, just nothing. My flashlight beam swept over the floor, the machines, the old walls. Dust motes danced in the air, but the silence wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud. And then I heard it. A laugh. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But it was there, a deep, guttural chuckle that came from somewhere deep in the mill. "Police!" I called out. My voice echoed back at me, hollow and warped. No response. I moved deeper inside, my hand tightening on the Glock's grip. The laugh came again, followed by a scraping noise, like nails dragging across metal. My flashlight beam caught a glint, a streak of something wet, dark, leading toward a staircase spiraling into the basement. Every instinct screamed to call for backup, but my radio still gave me nothing but static. So, against my better judgment, I went down. The stairs groaned under my weight, the kind of sound that made you think they might collapse at any second. The smell got worse, thick and sickening, clinging to my clothes. When I reached the bottom, my light flickered, as if something was messing with the battery. I slapped it, cursing under my breath. That's when I saw them. Boot prints. But they weren't walking, they were dragging. Long, erratic streaks trailed behind each print, as though whoever made them had been pulling something heavy. Or someone. The trail led to a massive steel door. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, but it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Inside was impossible. The room wasn't empty. It was filled with rows of mannequins. Not just any mannequins. These were grotesque, twisted. Some had too many arms. Others had faces stretched into impossible smiles, their eyes wide and bulging. And then I saw her. A woman was tied to a chair in the middle of the room. Her head slumped forward, blood dripping from her chin onto the floor. I rushed to her, my heart hammering in my chest. "Ma'am," I whispered, my voice hoarse. As I reached her, her head snapped up. Her eyes were gone. Before I could react, the steel door slammed shut behind me. The sound echoed through the room, and suddenly, the mannequins weren't still anymore. They were moving. I spun around, my flashlight beam darting over the mannequins. They weren't just moving, they were twitching, jerking, as if learning how to use their limbs. Their warped, grinning faces turned toward me, each one tilting its head in unison. "Police!" I barked, my voice cracking. Stay where you are. They didn't. The mannequins began to step forward, their movements unnatural and stilted, like marionettes on tangled strings. My flashlight flickered again, plunging the room into darkness for half a second. When the light returned, they were closer, too close. I fired. The muzzle flash lit the room for a split second. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet hit one of the mannequins square in the chest. But instead of falling, it just absorbed the impact. The sound it made wasn't wood or plastic, but something soft and wet, like flesh. A dark liquid oozed from the bullet hole, dripping onto the floor. "What the hell?" I muttered, backing away. The woman in the chair groaned. Her head lolled to the side, and for the first time, I saw her lips moving. She was whispering something, over and over again. I leaned in, desperate to hear her. But as I got closer, I realized she wasn't whispering. She was humming. A lullaby. The mannequins lunged. I barely had time to react. One of them grabbed my arm, its fingers cold and slimy, like rotting meat. I wrenched free and fired again, the shot shattering its head. But instead of collapsing, the mannequin just stood there, its neck stump tilting toward me as if still watching. Another one swung a jagged, claw-like hand at me, slicing through the fabric of my uniform and drawing blood. I stumbled back, my heel catching on something. I fell hard, my flashlight clattering to the floor. In the dim, flickering light, I saw the woman in the chair sit up straight. Her empty socket stared directly at me as she began to laugh. A low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "Why are you here?" she rasped, her voice layered, as if a dozen people were speaking through her. "I'm here to help," I shouted, struggling to my feet. The mannequins were closing in, their grinning faces inches away. "What do you want?" Her laugh grew louder, echoing off the steel walls. "Help? No. You're here because it called you." "What called me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed a trembling finger toward the far corner of the room. My eyes followed her gesture, and that's when I saw it. A mirror. But not just any mirror. It was massive, spanning the entire wall, its surface rippling like liquid silver. My own reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and pale, but there was something wrong. My reflection wasn't moving like I was. It was smiling, couldn't look away. The reflection leaned closer, pressing its hands against the glass, as if trying to push through. Behind it, shadows writhed, shapes moving in the silvery depths of the mirror. The woman's laughter turned into a scream, shrill and ear-piercing. The mannequins froze, their heads snapping toward the mirror in unison. "Run," the woman hissed, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. "Run before it's too late." For once, I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my flashlight and bolted for the steel door. It was still shut, but I slammed into it with everything I had. The rusted hinges groaned, and with one final push, it gave way, spilling me into the dark hallway. Behind me, the laughter, the screams, and the sound of shattering glass filled the air. I didn't stop to look back. I sprinted up the stairs, my breath ragged, my legs burning. When I reached the main floor, I could hear something following me. Heavy, wet footsteps, like bare feet slapping against the concrete. I burst through the side door into the night. The mist had thickened, wrapping around the mill like a living thing. My cruiser was still there, its headlights dim in the fog. I threw myself inside, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I tore out of the gravel lot. In the rearview mirror, I saw the silhouettes of the mannequins standing in the doorway, watching me leave. But just as I thought I was safe, I noticed something else. My reflection in the mirror wasn't me anymore. It was smiling. I didn't stop driving until I was halfway across town. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, and the reflection in the rearview mirror haunted me. The smirk, it wasn't mine. It was too wide, too knowing, as if whoever or whatever was staring back had seen something I hadn't. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, throwing the car into park and scrambling out into the cold night air. My breath came in shallow gasps as I paced in circles, trying to make sense of what had happened. My shirt was damp with sweat, and the cut on my arm stung like fire. It was just an old mill. Just a stupid abandoned building, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something out with me. I glanced at the side mirror on the cruiser. My reflection was still there, perfectly normal now, but I didn't trust it. I avoided looking too long. The radio crackled, snapping me out of my thoughts. Unit 4, report. What's your status? Dispatch's voice came through, calm and professional. I grabbed the receiver, hesitating for a moment. What the hell was I supposed to say? That mannequins attacked me? That there's something in a mirror that's now stalking me? Unit 4 here, I said finally, my voice shaky. Incident at Drexel Mill. Possible break-in. I'll file a report. Dispatch didn't ask any follow-ups, just confirmed and signed off. But I knew that was a lie. I wasn't filing anything. I didn't even know what to write. When I got home, it was nearly 2 a.m. My apartment felt different. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, and the ticking of the old clock on the wall was deafening. I locked the door behind me and went straight to the bathroom to clean the cut on my arm. As I leaned over the sink, I caught my reflection again. This time it was normal, just my tired, haggard face staring back. But as I rinsed the wound, I could feel it watching me. I stood still, breathing heavily, before finally gathering the courage to turn off the faucet and look directly into the mirror. First, nothing happened. It was just me. Then my reflection blinked. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the towel rack. My reflection leaned forward, placing its hands against the glass. Its expression was eager, hungry. You can't run, it whispered, its lips moving out of sync with mine. Not from us. The lights flickered, and in that moment, the reflection reached through. I swear to God, it reached out of the mirror. I bolted from the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and grabbing the heaviest thing I could find, a chair from the kitchen. My breath came in ragged gasps as I braced myself, waiting for the bathroom door to fly open, for whatever was in there to come out. But nothing happened. The apartment was silent again, save for the pounding of my heart. I didn't go back into the bathroom. Instead, I dragged a dresser in front of the door and sat on the couch, clutching my Glock until sunrise. The next morning, I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe even a hallucination from whatever I'd smelled in the mill. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. But as I was getting dressed for my shift, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The mirror in my living room, the one I'd walked past 100 times, was cracked. Not just cracked, shattered in a jagged, almost deliberate pattern. And in the very center of the break, there was a single bloody handprint. Mine. For the next week, the reflection haunted me. It was never direct, never obvious enough to convince anyone else. I catch it moving in ways I didn't, its lips forming words I couldn't hear. My own face would twist into that horrible smile when I wasn't looking. I tried covering the mirrors, but that didn't stop it. At night, I'd hear faint laughter coming from behind the glass, whispers slipping through the fabric I'd taped over them. And then came the dreams. In them, I was standing in front of the giant mirror from the mill. Shadows writhed behind me, figures with too many limbs, their faces hidden. The glass rippled, and my reflection smiled that awful, knowing grin. Soon, it would say, its voice like static, "We'll be whole again." I finally broke. One night, I packed everything I could into my car and left. Drove as far as my tank would take me, stopping only when I reached a cheap motel on the edge of nowhere. The room didn't have a mirror. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. I locked the door, barricaded it with a chair, and collapsed onto the bed. But in the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of something scratching at the motel window. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But I couldn't stop myself. I pulled back the curtain, and there it was, my reflection, smiling, from the other side of the glass. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure outside the window wasn't me. Not entirely. It was wearing my face, but its eyes, they were wrong. Too bright, too full of malice. As if they weren't just looking at me. They were looking through me. It raised a hand, pressing its palm against the glass, and its lips curled into that awful, too wide smile. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unable to move or think. Then the smile shifted, and it mouthed a single word, "Open." I stumbled back, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no, this isn't real." But it was. The window rattled, the glass quivering as if something was trying to push through. I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table, holding it like a weapon, and backed toward the door. My mind raced, but there was no plan. There was nowhere to run. And then the window shattered. The sound was deafening, the shards of glass spraying across the room like rain. I shielded my face with my arm, but when I lowered it, the reflection was gone. No, not gone. It was inside. The figure stood in the middle of the room, impossibly tall, its features twisted and wrong. The smile was still there, but now its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. Its limbs were elongated, almost insect-like, and they twitched unnaturally as it took a step toward me. What do you want?" I screamed, my voice cracking. It tilted its head, its neck bending at an unnatural angle. "To make you perfect," it rasped, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. I threw the lamp at it. The lamp shattered against its chest, but it didn't even flinch. It took another step, its bony fingers reaching out, the tips ending in sharp, claw-like points. Desperate, I dove for the door, fumbling with the lock, but before I could open it, the thing grabbed my ankle. Its grip was ice-cold, the claws digging into my skin. I screamed, kicking wildly, but it was no use. It pulled me closer, its strength unnatural, its face hovering inches from mine. "Don't fight," it whispered. "This is where you belong." And then the light changed. A blinding flash filled the room, pure and searing, casting harsh shadows across the walls. The figure recoiled, its distorted features twisting in pain. It released me, its screech splitting the air, and I scrambled to my feet, clutching my bleeding ankle. The light grew brighter, emanating from a large shard of glass still lodged in the broken window. The reflection in the shard wasn't mine. It was something else, something glowing and radiant, its presence overwhelming. "Go!" the reflection commanded, its voice echoing in my mind. "Now!" I didn't wait to argue. Limping, I threw the door open and ran into the night, not stopping until I was halfway down the highway, my lungs burning, my vision blurred with tears. When I finally turned back, the motel was a distant silhouette, its broken window glowing faintly in the dark. I never returned to Drexel, never told anyone what happened. But the reflection hasn't left me, not completely. Sometimes, when I glance at my shadow or catch a glimpse of myself in a window, I see it, that smile, waiting, watching. It doesn't chase me anymore. It doesn't need to, because deep down I know I didn't escape. Not really. You might think that was the end of it, that I ran far enough, buried it deep enough to forget. But some things, they don't let go. Months passed. I moved states, changed my name, even left the force. I told myself it was over. I clung to that belief like a lifeline. But the truth? It was only waiting. The first sign came at night. I'd been living in a small cabin I'd rented in the mountains, away from cities, people, and, most importantly, mirrors. I'd avoided reflective surfaces entirely. No glass, no windows, not even water that was too still. My life was a string of precautions, all to keep it at bay. But that night I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud, just a soft tapping, like fingernails against wood. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was a branch against the window. The cabin was old. The trees surrounding it swayed with the wind. But the tapping didn't come from the window. It came from inside. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear over the silence. The sound came again, closer this time. Tap, tap, tap. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I reached for the revolver I kept by the bed, my hands trembling as I flicked off the safety. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response. Slowly, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I moved toward the door, the gun raised. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if it was coming from all around me. My pulse thundered in my ears as I gripped the doorknob and threw it open. The hallway was empty. The cabin was small, just a kitchen, a bathroom, and a single room. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere someone could be. But the tapping didn't stop. It grew louder, faster, echoing through the walls. I turned toward the kitchen, my gun leading the way. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the countertops, the table, the cabinets. Nothing out of place. Nothing at all. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A reflection. The glass of the microwave door. I'd forgotten it was there. The black, glossy surface shimmered faintly, catching the dim light from my flashlight. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. But then the reflection moved. It wasn't me. It was standing behind me. I whipped around, firing blindly. The gunshots echoed in the small cabin, the sound deafening. My ears rang as the flashlight beam danced wildly across the walls. But there was nothing there. The tapping stopped. My breathing was ragged, my hands trembling as I lowered the gun. The cabin was still again, the silence almost suffocating. I turned back to the microwave door, my flashlight illuminating its surface. The reflection was gone, but etched into the glass, in jagged, crooked letters, were 3 words: "You can't hide." I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. The reflection didn't appear again, but the message in the glass remained. No matter how much I scrubbed, no matter what I tried, the words wouldn't fade. The next day, I packed what little I had and left the cabin behind. I drove for hours, the highway stretching endlessly ahead of me. Every reflective surface felt like a threat, the side mirrors, the rearview mirror, even the gleam of my phone screen. I stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, desperate for a break. As I filled the tank, I caught a glimpse of myself in the car window. Except it wasn't me. It smiled. And then it whispered, its voice clear as day, even through the glass. "You're already mine. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. Maybe I'll never stop. But if you're reading this, take my advice. Cover your mirrors. Stay away from reflections. And if you ever see yourself smile when you shouldn't, run. You'd think I'd have given up, that I'd just let it take me, let the nightmare win. But survival's a funny thing. It doesn't matter how hopeless it seems. Something in you fights. Something in me still believed I could escape. But the truth? I wasn't running from it anymore. I was running toward something. After the gas station incident, I spent weeks digging for answers. Libraries, old police archives, fringe internet forums, the kind of places no sane person spends their time. I wasn't just hunting for a way out. I was looking for why. Why me? Why the mirror? Why was it following me? And finally, I found it. It wasn't some ancient curse or a ghost story. It was Drexel. Everything came back to that mill. The stories, the history, it was worse than I'd imagined. The land Drexel was built on? It had a reputation long before the factory went up. There were reports of disappearances going back to the 1800s, strange lights in the woods, whispers of people who went there and came back. Wrong. And the mill itself? It was a perfect storm. Industrial accidents, corruption, even a mass death from a boiler explosion back in 1953. It wasn't just a building. It was a wound that never healed. And the mirror? It wasn't just a mirror. It was a door. I knew what I had to do. It took months to prepare. I needed equipment, an axe for the wood, a sledgehammer for the concrete, enough gas to burn the place to ash. I was terrified, but more than that, I was determined. If this thing wanted me, it could have me. But not before I took that mirror down with me. I arrived at Drexel Mill just before midnight. The place looked even worse than before. More decayed, more hostile, like it had been waiting for me. The air was thick with that same sickly sweet stench, and the mist coiled around the building like it was alive. This time, I didn't hesitate. I kicked in the side door and stepped inside, the axe slung over my shoulder. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam bouncing off rusted machines and broken beams. The silence was deafening, but I could feel it watching me, waiting. "I'm here," I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty space. "Come and get me." Nothing answered. Not at first. But then, from deep within the mill, I heard it. Laughter. I followed the sound, gripping the axe so tightly my knuckles ached. It led me down the same path as before, past the stairs, through the hallway to that cursed steel door. This time it was wide open, as if inviting me in. The room beyond was exactly as I remembered. Mannequins frozen in twisted poses, the air thick with decay. And there, at the far end, was the mirror. It was larger than I remembered, its surface rippling like liquid, its glow pulsating faintly. My reflection stood in it, smiling that horrible, knowing smile. "Welcome back," it said, its voice dripping with mockery. I didn't respond. I hefted the axe and marched forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The mannequins didn't move this time. They just watched, their grinning faces turned toward me. When I reached the mirror, my reflection tilted its head, studying me. "You think you can destroy me?" it asked, laughing softly. "You don't understand, do you? I'm not trapped here. You are." "Not for long," I growled, and swung the axe with everything I had. The blade hit the mirror with a deafening clang. Sparks flew, and the surface rippled violently, like a stone dropped into water. My reflection screamed, its smile vanishing as it slammed its hands against the glass. "You can't stop us," it shrieked. "We're everywhere. Every shadow, every reflection." I swung again, cutting it off mid-sentence. This time, the mirror cracked, a web of fractures spreading across its surface. The room trembled, the mannequins jerking and twitching like puppets with tangled strings. The air grew cold, and a deafening roar filled my ears. The mirror's surface began to shatter inward, the cracks widening as if something was trying to pull me through. I stumbled back, dropping the axe as the ground beneath me shook. "You can't escape," the reflection bellowed, its face distorted and monstrous. "You are already—" The final swing silenced it. The mirror exploded, shards flying in every direction, the force knocking me off my feet. The mannequins collapsed, lifeless, as the room was swallowed in darkness. And then silence. When I opened my eyes, the mirror was gone. The room was empty, save for the shattered glass on the floor. The mannequins were nothing but piles of broken wood and fabric, their twisted forms reduced to rubble. I stumbled out of the mill, gasping for air, the cold night biting at my skin. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest was gone. I'd done it. I destroyed the door. But as I climbed into my car and caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, my heart stopped. It was smiling. You'd think the story would end there. A shattered mirror, a ruined mill, and a man left broken but alive. But life, especially mine, doesn't work that way. The smile in the rearview, that was just the beginning. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. No radio, no sounds of tires on asphalt, just silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. My reflection stayed in the rearview, grinning, but it didn't move otherwise. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that I was just imagining things. I kept telling myself that right up until it blinked. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop on the side of the empty highway. My chest heaved as I stared into the rearview mirror, waiting for it to move again. But the reflection just sat there, smiling, its head cocked at an angle I knew I hadn't made. It didn't match me anymore. And then it spoke. "You're not done," it whispered, its voice low and crackling like distant static. "You didn't destroy me. You set me free." I turned around, desperate to see if something or someone was in the back seat. Nothing. Just empty air and the faint smell of burnt plastic. When I turned back to the mirror, the reflection was gone. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. By the time I got home, the unease had settled into a permanent knot in my gut. Every shadow seemed to move, Every reflective surface carried an oppressive weight. I covered the bathroom mirror with a towel and shoved the one from the bedroom into the closet. I even turned my phone face down, avoiding the screen like it was radioactive. But it didn't help. The dreams came back that night. I was in the mill again, standing before the shattered mirror. Except it wasn't broken anymore. It was whole, its surface swirling like molten silver. My reflection stood inside it, smiling that too wide grin. But now there were others. Shadows with too many arms, too many faces, pressing against the glass from the other side. "You thought you won," my reflection said, its voice overlapping with a dozen others. "But we're everywhere. You only broke the gate. You can't stop what's already here." I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for air. My heart was hammering in my chest. But the worst part wasn't the dream. The worst part was the sound. A soft tapping, coming from the covered mirror in the bathroom. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like nails on glass. My mind screamed at me to stay in bed, to pull the covers over my head like a scared kid. But something else, a deeper, primal instinct, forced me to get up. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door and crept toward the bathroom. The tapping stopped as I got closer, the silence stretching out until I could hear my own heartbeat. With one trembling hand, I reached out and pulled the towel down. The mirror was blank, just an ordinary piece of glass, showing nothing but my pale, exhausted face. For a moment, I let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding through me. Then my reflection blinked. It wasn't me. The face in the mirror twisted, its grin stretching wider than humanly possible, revealing rows of jagged, black teeth. Its eyes darkened, void-like, and its head tilted at an impossible angle. "You can't hide," it hissed, its voice echoing through the small bathroom. "Not anymore." The glass rippled, and a hand, long, skeletal, and dripping with black ichor, pressed against the surface. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the rug, as the reflection pushed harder, the glass cracking under the pressure. I scrambled to my feet and swung the bat with all my strength. The mirror shattered, shards exploding outward, and for a moment, everything went silent. But then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh, coming from behind me. I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. The door was still closed, the shower curtain undisturbed. Yet the laugh continued, growing louder, more distorted, until it filled the entire room. It was everywhere and nowhere, a sound that didn't just touch my ears but burrowed into my mind. The lights flickered, and for a split second, I saw them. Figures moving in the shards of broken glass on the floor. Dozens of them, their faces twisted into the same grinning expressions, their hands clawing at the edges of their fractured prison. And then they stopped. All at once, the laughter ceased. The room plunged into an oppressive silence. I stood there, bat in hand, my chest heaving, waiting for the next attack. But it didn't come. Instead, the shards of glass began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they dragged themselves across the floor, converging in the center of the room. Piece by piece, they formed a new shape, a mirror, smaller, jagged, but whole. And in its surface, my reflection smiled. "We told you," it said. "You can't escape." I left that night, didn't pack, didn't care where I was going, just drove until the sun came up. But no matter how far I go, no matter what I try, the mirrors find me. In windows, in puddles, in the polished metal of my car's hood. They're always there. And so is the smile. It's been weeks, or maybe months. Time doesn't mean much when you can't stop running. Every motel, every gas station, every fleeting moment of sleep is haunted by that smile. It's not just in mirrors anymore. It's in shadows, glass, water, anything with the faintest reflection. But the worst part? The starting to feel familiar. I've learned to avoid looking too long. Glances are safe. A quick look to make sure my face is still my face. Anything more, and the smile creeps back. The longer I stare, the more I feel it pulling at me, as though the reflection and I are trading places, inch by inch. Last night, it almost won. I was parked at the edge of a forest, deep in the middle of nowhere. I'd driven for hours, looking for some place that didn't have reflective surfaces. The truck side mirrors were covered with duct tape, and the rear view was long gone, ripped out and tossed miles back. But the night was still, too still. No wind, no chirping insects, just silence. The air felt thick, heavy, like the world was holding its breath. And then I heard it, that laugh. It came from the woods, low and guttural, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. I grabbed the crowbar I kept by my seat and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The laugh grew louder as I moved toward the tree line, and then it stopped. The forest seemed to hold its breath. And then I saw it. Puddle. Shouldn't have been there. The ground was dry, the nearest stream miles away, but the puddle shimmered under the moonlight, impossibly dark and still. My chest tightened as I stepped closer, the crowbar shaking in my hands. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew, but I did anyway. At first, the surface just showed my face. Pale, gaunt, exhausted. But then the ripples started. Slowly at first, distorting my reflection until it wasn't mine anymore. The face staring back at me was grinning, its eyes black voids that seemed to stretch endlessly inward. "You're almost ready?" it whispered, its voice slithering into my mind. "You've run long enough. It's time to come home." The puddle rippled, and a hand shot out, impossibly long and dripping with black ichor. It grabbed my ankle with a strength that didn't belong in this world, pulling me toward the water's surface. I screamed, swinging the crowbar wildly, but it was no use. The hand pulled harder, dragging me to my knees as the reflection's grin widened. "Let go," it hissed. "You're one of us now." I don't remember much after that, just pain. The cold, wet sensation of being dragged into the puddle. The suffocating pressure as the darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, I was lying in my truck, soaked to the bone. The forest was silent again, and the puddle was gone. But when I looked at my hands, they were shaking, not from fear, from excitement. And when I checked my reflection in the truck's window, it wasn't smiling anymore. I don't know how much time I have left. The reflection doesn't fight me anymore. It doesn't need to. It's inside me now, whispering in the back of my mind, growing stronger every day. And the worst part? I think I want it to. You're still reading this? Then maybe you'll understand. Maybe you felt it too. That itch at the edges of your mind, that fleeting glimpse of a face in the glass that isn't yours. If you're still here, if you're still listening, it means it's already started for you. And trust me, it doesn't end. After the puddle, things began to change. Not all at once, just little things at first. I catch myself humming a tune I didn't recognize. My shadow stretched a little too far at sunset. And the smile, oh God, the smile. I didn't have to look in mirrors to see it anymore. I could feel it, pulling at the corners of my mouth, like a mask I couldn't take off. Strangers noticed too. In gas stations, diners, rest stops, they'd give me strange looks, whispering behind my back. "What's wrong with him?" they'd ask. "Why is he smiling like that?" But the thing is, I wasn't smiling. Not yet. The next incident happened in a small town. I'd stopped at a diner for coffee and a chance to gather my thoughts. The place was quiet, the kind of roadside joint that hasn't updated its menu since the 80s. A waitress with tired eyes poured my coffee, and I kept my head down, avoiding the reflective chrome on the napkin dispenser. But as I stirred the coffee, I noticed something in the black surface of the liquid. It wasn't my face looking back. It was someone else's. No, not someone. Something. Its grin stretched wide, too wide, its teeth jagged and wrong. Its eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I felt it. A cold hand pressing against my chest, its voice slithering into my mind. "Almost there," it whispered. The mug shattered in my hands, coffee splashing across the table. The waitress ran over, her concern genuine, but her words made my blood run cold. "Sir, your smile. It's terrifying." I left the diner without paying, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel of the truck. The words of the waitress repeated in my head, over and over. I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror, and what I saw made me slam the brakes in the middle of the road. It wasn't just a smile anymore. It was a rictus. The corners of my mouth stretched too far, splitting the skin, the dried blood crusting over like cracks in porcelain. My teeth were sharper, my gums dark and receding. But the worst part was my eyes. They were changing. The whites were fading, replaced by an inky blackness that seeped outward, like ink spilled on paper. I reached up to touch my face, but the moment my fingers brushed the smile, a jolt of pain shot through me, freezing me in place. That night I couldn't sleep. The whispers were louder, crawling inside my head like insects. I tried to drown them out with music, the static of an old radio, even screaming into the void of the night. But nothing helped. And then, as the clock struck midnight, the mirror on the motel wall began to hum. I hadn't even noticed it before, hidden behind the dusty curtains. But now it was alive, its surface rippling like water, the hum growing louder and louder until I couldn't stand it anymore. I tore the curtain down, prepared to smash the mirror to pieces. But when I looked at it, I froze. It wasn't my reflection staring back. It was me, the me I used to be, the real me. No smile, no blackened eyes, just me. Help me, it begged, its voice raw and desperate. You're not too far gone. Not yet. The whispers in my head screamed, 1,000 voices shouting in unison. My hands trembled as I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold glass. For a moment I felt hope, and then the reflection smiled. Its face twisted, the skin tearing as the grin stretched impossibly wide. Its eyes turned black, void-like, as it leaned forward, pressing its palms against the glass. You're already mine, it hissed. There's no escape. The glass shattered, and everything went dark. I woke up in the truck, my head pounding, my clothes soaked with sweat. The motel was gone, replaced by a stretch of endless highway. I don't know how I got there. I don't know how much time has passed. But I know one thing. It's not trying to take me anymore. It's waiting for me to let go. And the truth? I don't know if I can hold on much longer. You've made it this far. I admire that, I really do. But here's the thing, they want me to keep talking. To keep telling you the story. You think this is entertainment, don't you? Just another spooky tale to pass the time. But you don't realize. Every word brings it closer. Every sentence lets it grow. It's been days since the motel. Or maybe weeks. I don't know anymore. Time doesn't feel real. Not when every reflection feels like a doorway. Every shadow a trap waiting to snap shut. The highway stretches endlessly, the landscape blending into itself. Gas stations, diners, motels. I keep driving because stopping feels like giving up. But the truth? It doesn't matter how far I go. It's already here. The whispers have changed. They're not just voices now. They're memories or things that feel like memories, but they aren't mine. I see flashes of lives I've never lived. A man staring into a mirror, his face splitting into a smile as blood pours from his eyes. A child reaching into a puddle and never coming back. A woman whispering, "I see you," to her own reflection moments before it drags her through. Each vision leaves a piece behind, like a splinter lodged in my brain. I don't know what's real anymore, but one thing is clear. This isn't just about me. It's about us. 2 nights ago, I stopped at a diner. I don't know why. Maybe I was hungry, maybe I just wanted to feel human for a little while. The place was nearly empty, save for a trucker nursing a cup of coffee at the counter and a waitress with tired eyes. I took a seat in the corner, my back to the wall, my eyes scanning every reflective surface. Chrome napkin holders, the windows, even the glossy surface of the ketchup bottle, I avoided them all. The waitress brought me coffee without a word. Her hands shook as she set the cup down, her eyes darting to my face. "You okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, though I could see the answer in her reflection on the coffee's surface. My face was wrong. Pale, stretched, the edges blurring as if I were disappearing. "You should leave," she said, her voice trembling. "They don't like it when you linger." Before I could ask what she meant, the lights flickered, and the trucker at the counter turned to look at me. His eyes were black, His smile stretched too wide. And then he whispered, "It's time." I ran, left the coffee untouched, bolted out the door and into the night. My truck roared to life, the tires squealing as I tore down the highway. But no matter how fast I drove, I could see them. In the rearview mirror, in the windows of passing cars. Faces grinning, hollow-eyed, watching. Shadows slithered along the edge of my vision, curling like smoke. And then the radio crackled to life. "You're almost there," the voice said. It was mine. "I don't know where I'm going. The highway never ends, the road signs make no sense. Sometimes they're written in languages I don't recognize. Sometimes they're blank. But the whispers are louder now, guiding me, pulling me toward something." Last night, I dreamed of Drexel Mill again. The mirror was gone, but the mannequins were there, their heads twisting to follow me as I walked through the darkened halls. At the center of the room, a puddle shimmered, its surface rippling with faint light. And when I looked into it, I didn't see myself. I saw you. You're part of it now, you know. You've read this far. You've seen the signs. The way shadows move when they shouldn't, the strange chill in your reflection, the feeling that something is watching you from the corner of your eye. They're with you now. They're always with you. This isn't the end. Not for me and not for you. Because the truth, the mirror doesn't need you to look into it. It just needs you to see. This is it. The final entry. You've followed me this far, and I owe you the truth. The real truth. Not about me but about you. About what happens next. I kept running. Miles, days, maybe even years, who knows? But eventually the highway ended. It just stopped. One moment there was asphalt stretching into infinity. The next, nothing but a thick fog rolling over cracked pavement. My truck sputtered to a halt, the engine coughing and dying. No matter how many times I turned the key, it wouldn't start. So I did the one thing I swore I'd never do again. I got out. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something metallic. I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The fog swallowed everything, trees, road signs, even sound. My own footsteps felt muffled, like I was walking on padded ground. And then I saw it, a shimmer in the distance, faint, like moonlight on water. My chest tightened as I walked toward it, my boots crunching on gravel that shouldn't have been there. The shimmer grew brighter, resolving into a familiar shape. A mirror. This one wasn't like the others. It wasn't warped or cracked or bleeding light. It was clean, perfect, reflecting me with crystal clarity. But the reflection wasn't smiling. It was crying. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered, my voice breaking. The reflection shook its head, tears streaming down its face. "You still don't get it, do you?" it said, its voice trembling. "This was never about us." "What do you mean?" I asked, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch the glass. It leaned closer, its forehead pressing against mine through the surface. "You let it in," it said. "You let them in." Before I could respond, the glass rippled, and the reflection smiled. Not a grin, not a rictus, just a sad, knowing smile. "Run," it said, its voice barely above a whisper. "Run while you still can." And then the glass exploded. I was thrown back, the shards cutting into my skin. The fog swirled around me, dark shapes coalescing in the mist. Figures with too many arms, too many eyes, their smiles stretching impossibly wide. "You can't leave," they whispered in unison, their voices echoing in my head. "Not now. Not ever." I scrambled to my feet, blood dripping from my arms, and ran. I don't know where I was going. There was no road, no signs, just endless fog. But I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing onto the cold, damp ground. And when I looked up, there it was again. Another mirror. This time I didn't hesitate. I picked up a rock and smashed it, the shards scattering into the fog. The figures screamed, their voices shrill and deafening. But they didn't stop. Another mirror appeared and I destroyed it. Then another and another. But they kept coming. For every mirror I shattered, 2 more took its place. The reflections multiplied, their grins growing wider, their whispers louder. You can't destroy us, they said. We are everywhere. And then I understood. This wasn't about fighting. It wasn't about running. It was about letting go. So I stood there, surrounded by mirrors, and I stopped. Stopped swinging, stopped screaming, stopped running. The fog grew still, the whispers fading to silence. The mirrors stopped multiplying, their surfaces dark and still. And then, for the first time, I smiled. Not their smile. Mine. I don't know where I am now. The fog is gone, and the mirrors are silent. I can still feel them watching, but they don't chase me anymore. Maybe I've become one of them, or maybe I've finally escaped. But if you've made it this far, there's one thing you need to know. This isn't just my story. It's yours too. Because every time you see your reflection, every time you catch a glimpse of something in the corner of your eye, you'll wonder. And when you smile, you'll know.